What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the Tampa Bay Lightning's current contract situation around their captain, Steven Stamkos. Now, normally this wouldn't be such a big story because in Tampa Bay especially, usually a year out from free agency, these guys are locked up, which makes the story about their captain here, Steven Stamkos, that much more interesting. As now we are going into the regular season, we're in the preseason, getting ready, training camp is wrapped up, and there still has not been a new contract for Steven Stamkos. It's been kind of an underrated storyline throughout most of the summer, but now, Steven Stamkos has fired his first shot across the bow and actually gone public talking about the lack of conversation and communication with Tampa being a little bit concerning for the Bolts captain. So we're going to take a look at that today. So, like I'm kind of saying here, to start the video, what's most concerning about this whole situation with Stamkos is the fact that, a big storyline and a big theme of Tampa Bay's sort of way of handling contracts and things like that is on July 1st, a year away from free agency, Tampa finds a way to get these guys locked in. And just to give you a couple examples in recent history, Nikita Kucherov, they signed him on the first day that they could. Yep. Yeah, July. Okay, so a couple days in. July 10th of 2018, he signed an 8-year, $76 million contract. He's still in that contract now. Braden Point, very recently, in 2021, July of 2021, signed an 8-year, $76 million contract. And that was signed by Julien BriseBois. Anthony Cirelli, July 13th, 2022. That was this past summer, last year, in 2022, signed an 8-year, $50 million contract. Two more examples for you guys. Mikhail Sergachev signed on July 13th of 2022. Again, that's another BriseBois signing last year, 8 years, $68 million. That already looks like a great contract because I think he's even going to be better than he was last year. That was a really good deal, but still, the point remains. Victor Hedman, another great example. July 1st of 2016, signed an 8-year, $63 million contract. And, of course, back in 2016, that was during the Steve Yzerman era in Tampa. So, when you look at all these contracts, they're all signed in July or early or late June, right? Like Braden Point. So that's why there is a level of concern here in the sense, and even Chernak. I want to mention Eric Chernak just to continue our theme here. July 13th, 2022, 8-year, $41.6 million. You get the theme. Either late June or July is when these guys get locked up. And for Steven Stamkos, who's been the captain of this team, there is a little bit of concern. Like, why hasn't he gotten anything yet from Tampa? Now, there's a couple of reasons why. The first reason, he is 33 years old. Stamkos, yes, he's played a lot of hockey. He just played in his 1,000th game at the end of last season. He's played 1,003 NHL games. He has 1,056 points in his career. Last season, he was above a point per game, 84 points in 81 games. The season before that, 106 points in 81 games. Even in the playoffs during their cup run, 19 points in 23 games, where they ultimately lost to the Colorado Avalanche. And then last year in 6 games against the Leafs, he picked up 4 points, 2 goals in that 6-game series. So that's a superstar. And guys that produce at that level get paid. But like I said, the injury history and the fact he's 33 years old does give you genuine concern here for the Ontario native. Now, we remember the last time that a contract situation happened in 2016 with Steve Yzerman. There was some complications even in that. Back in 2016, there was talk he had spoken with Buffalo and Toronto, where, considering he's from Markham, Ontario, there was definitely a reason to believe he could head north, closer to home. But ultimately, he stayed in Tampa and probably took less money to stay in Tampa. Even, the sales tax and things like that, the no state tax, things like that definitely played a factor. But he wanted to play in Tampa. And he was the captain of that franchise. He had been there. He was the first overall pick, drafted by the Lightning. But even back then, there was a sense that he was never the priority on this team. And a lot of people were shocked that he took the contract that he did back in 2016. $8.5 million, even then, was a sweetheart contract. I mean, it looks even better today, but that was a great contract, even when he signed that back in 2016. So, it was one of those things where Yzerman was very set. Listen, if you're it's either take 8.5 or hit the road. That's it. That's the best I can do for you. And there was never that true priority to Stamkos in the way that maybe people should have probably expected, right? And I think we're seeing that again here. And no discredit to some of these guys, but would you not say Stamkos is more of a priority than a guy like Erik Cernak? Now, yes, in terms of maybe their value right now today, yeah, Cernak is probably pretty close in value to Stamkos at this point in his career, but in terms of the makeup and the face of the franchise, Stamkos obviously has more pull than, say, a guy like Erik Cernak. But the priority to Cernak was obviously higher because they locked him up before we came to the end of July last year, alongside guys like Cirelli and Point and Sergachev. Why didn't Stamkos get a new contract this time around when he was supposed to get paid? So it's either one or two things here. Either Stamkos is going to sign for a longer-term deal, maybe a 5-year deal. He wants to play 20 years in the NHL, so let's say he wants to play till 40. He's looking at probably a 5 to 7-year deal. He's not going to get the money that he wants, though. If based off the production of the last 2 years, over a point per game, he's realistically not going to be producing at that level at, honestly, the next 2 years, 3 years. At 35, 36 years old. So half the contract in that scenario would be kind of like, I don't even know if you're going to provide much for me at half of that contract. So that's kind of why I think Tampa is a little bit worried about making a big deal here with Stamkos. And for Stamkos, I think he loves being in Tampa. I think it's more just we're seeing that continuation of the Steve Yzerman era there. It is a cutthroat, hard environment there in Tampa. And we see that they win in those environments. You look at Vegas, they won the Cup this past season. You look at a team like Tampa, the success they've had, but they've had to make some really tough decisions, right? Last year, a couple years ago, right after they won the Stanley Cup, Ryan McDonough, you're gone, you're traded. And it was basically within minutes and days of him lifting the Stanley Cup in Tampa, he was traded to Nashville. And that's kind of how Breezeball has run things in Tampa since Yzerman left. But that's kind of the continuation of how things were. And that's why I think this situation here, Stamkos' career earnings, he's got $99.5 million with it, about to hit $1 billion, almost $100 million in his career earnings, just off of hockey, not even sponsorships and things like that. So, money isn't a factor here, I would think. I think it's going to come down to how committed is Tampa and himself to staying there. And we've seen in the past Stamkos' commitment to the Bolts, the Tampa Bay Lightning, based off of what happened last time around. But let's see what Breezeball does this time around. Is he as committed to Stamkos as Stamkos is committed to the Lightning? And I think that's going to be a very poignant conversation here for the next couple of months, because the fact that we're going into training camp, going into the preseason, going now into the regular season with this talk, the fact there hasn't been much conversation does give you a little bit of pause and reason for concern. Now, this could come down to a situation where by the trade deadline, Tampa kind of does a Pasternak situation where things don't go well during the summer. They talked. Things didn't go well. Everyone was saying Pasternak was getting traded out of Boston. And by the time the trade deadline comes around, he's locked up in Boston, and we all forgot about it. And I think that's something here, too, to remember, is if Tampa, God forbid, you look in the division this year, not even the Eastern Conference alone, but the division alone, now you're losing Vasilevsky for the first 2 months of the season, and that goaltending is terrifying right now going into the season. Is this a year maybe Tampa has a reset? And is this a year where you want to go all in and re-sign a guy like Stamkos in a situation where it's not guaranteed that Tampa even makes the playoffs. And I know that kind of sounds like a loony conversation, but if I'm Julian Brisebois, there is no guarantee Tampa makes the playoffs this year. And if they get to the deadline and they just sign Stamkos to a long-term deal when, say, they could have gotten some value for him at the deadline, well, maybe that would have been what's best for the franchise. And if Stamkos really wanted to come back to Tampa, he goes for a cup run in Toronto or Ottawa or Buffalo for this season, and then come summer, he ends up coming back to the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's still a possibility as well. And I don't like the idea of saying, like, oh, he's definitely getting traded and things like that, but I think Brisebois is keeping doors open at this point because there's no need in this situation to force the issue with a guy like Stamkos. And is there a little bit of maybe, there is going to be that question of a prioritization, absolutely, especially when you look at what Tampa's done in recent history. But I think Stamkos' situation is quite a bit different. Like I said, the fact he's had the injury history, the fact he's 33 years old, and to be honest with you, I think they're waiting to see if his numbers continue this season because his numbers have been great the last couple years. And with that number, he should probably be making at least $10 million a season. But Tampa doesn't have that in the budget. And in all honesty, I think they know if they signed him to a 5 or 7 year deal, who knows if Tampa's even a cup contender at that point. So now you have a bad contract on your cap hit, a tough contract to move that might even cost you down the line. Why would Brisebois force that issue today when he has time? And GMs say this all the time. The most valuable thing sometimes is time. And I think in this situation with Stamkos, it's a shame for Stamkos because he's kind of the scapegoat going into the season. But that's the situation in Tampa. That's the situation they're in. Just going to be a matter of time to decide, really to look at Tampa. And like I said, I think that's the really important thing to remember here. Is Julian Brisebois and the Tampa Bay management as committed to this organization, or as committed to Stamkos as Stamkos is to this organization like we saw in 2016. So guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of the Tampa Bay Lightning? Hopefully re-signing Steven Stamkos. Do you think he'll re-sign? Do you think he won't re-sign? If he does, long-term, short-term deal with the Lightning. Does he go to Buffalo? Does he go to Toronto? Let me know your guys' thoughts as always. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.